Now it's time to take a look at Module 4, Natural Language Processing. So in this module, we'll take a look at what natural language processing is and some of the options for using NLP in Azure, and then we'll focus more specifically on some of the NLP related cognitive services that there are available to us in Azure. Let's start with an introduction to natural language processing. So natural language processing, which we normally just abbreviate to NLP, is the area of AI that deals with making sense of written and spoken language. Now the slide lists some common NLP related tasks. So for example, text analysis and entity recognition is used when we need to analyse a text document to determine its salient points or identify entities that it mentions, such as dates and places and people. So for example, a company might use AI to analyse industry magazine articles and try to find articles that mention their products or executives, or to determine the main subject in each article. Sentiment analysis is a form of text analysis that calculates a score that indicates how positive or negative a text extract is. So for example, a retailer might analyse reviews from customers and determine which ones are positive and which ones are negative. Speech recognition and synthesis are commonly used to build AI systems that can recognise spoken language as input and synthesise spoken output. So for example, an in-car system might enable hands-free communication by reading incoming text messages out loud or enabling you to verbally dictate a response. Machine translation is an important use of AI when we need to work internationally or across cultural boundaries, and we need to eliminate language barriers. AI can be used to automate the translation of written or spoken language. So for example, you might build an inbox add-in that can automatically translate incoming or outgoing emails, or you might have a conference call presentation system that simultaneously transcribes the speaker's words into multiple languages. And finally, semantic language modelling. Well, language can be pretty complex and nuanced, and multiple phrases might be used to mean the same thing. So for example, a driver might ask, "Where can I get gas near here?" Or, "What's the location of the closest gas station?" Or even, "Give me directions to a gas station." Now all of these essentially mean the same thing. So a semantic understanding of the language being used is needed to discern what the driver actually needs. So an automobile manufacturer might train a language model to understand phrases like these and respond by displaying appropriate satellite navigation directions. Now you could build your own custom NLP models using machine learning or various toolkits to solve those problems that we talked about on the previous slide. In particular, Python has a whole bunch of packages for NLP that you can use to do basic text analysis, such as term frequency analysis to find the most frequently used terms, or even to build complex semantic models based on your language. It's a pretty complex area, and using these types of packages can require a certain amount of programming expertise and a lot of understanding about the nuances of natural language processing. Using off-the-shelf packages like the cognitive services in Azure can help you develop a solution a little more quickly and with less specialist expertise. And we're going to explore these services in the next lesson. But for the moment, let's just list them out. For text analysis, there is the text analytics service, and that lets us do language detection, key phrase extraction, entity detection, and sentiment analysis. If you need to deal with spoken words, then you can use the speech service, which has text to speech and speech to text, so you can both recognize and synthesize text, and also speech translation, so you can translate speech between different languages. If you need to translate text, there's a separate translator text service that's used to do that. And then finally, there's the language understanding service, or LUIS as we call it, that is used for building custom language models. Let's take a look at a simple demo of some text analytics processing that we could do. So this online demo lets us analyze some text using the text analytics service. Now I've got some default text in here about Saturn, or I could type in my own, but I'm going to take that default and just go to the next step. And that next step is going to try and identify the key phrases in this text. In other words, what is this text really about? And it's going to try and identify the sentiment. And I get Saturn and planet and solar system and Jupiter and gas giant, average radius, times, and Earth as being the key phrases that are identified. So I get the sense this is about Saturn. It's a planet in the solar system, and it's something about the radius of that compared to Earth. And I can see that the statement is neutral. It's just a statement of fact. It's neither positive nor negative, so I get this neutral statement appearing here. If I move to the next step, I can see that it's identified some entities, and it's given me a link underneath them. You can see that Saturn and Solar System and Sun and Jupiter and Earth, in fact, all have links. So if I actually click the link for Saturn, it opens up to the Wikipedia article about Saturn. So I'm recognizing that as an entity. That's a specific thing. It's the planet Saturn, and there is an article about that on Wikipedia that we can go and view. Let's move to the next step. And in this case, we're actually doing a Bing entity search. We're using those entities to go and search for specific pages about those different entities. So I can see there's the page on Saturn that we just went to, but I've also got pages on the solar system, the sun. All of those entities that were recognized are showing up here. Now in lesson 2, we're going to take a closer look at the text analytics service, which we just saw in the demo, and some of the other NLP related services that are available for us in Azure. So the text analytics service is used to analyze text, as we just saw, and it can be used to take any document and do some text analysis. So for example, if I have some text like I had a wonderful vacation in France, and I might want to do some analysis of that text, I could use text analytics to, first of all, detect the predominant language, and in this case the predominant language of that text is English. I can detect the sentiment, and in this case that's a fairly positive phrase. I had a wonderful vacation in France. So we get some sort of score, a score between 0 and 1 that indicates how positive or negative that text is. I can detect key phrases that are in that text. In this case, wonderful vacation would come back, so that's telling me that's what this text is really about. It's a statement that I had a wonderful vacation. And I can detect entities that are mentioned in that, and those would be dates or places or people. That I can specifically call out. So in this case, France is identified as an entity in there. Now the speech service provides a speech-to-text API that you can use to implement text recognition. So the service supports text transcription for more than 60 languages of speech. And conversely, you can use the text-to-speech API that will synthesize audible speech from text, and it will give you the option to specify regionally appropriate voices with human-like pronunciation. For translation, well, if I need to translate text, I can use the translator text service, and that enables me to translate text between more than 60 languages. And I can also translate audible speech by using the speech service, which has the ability to produce translated output either in text or audio format. The language understanding service is generally known as LUIS, and that enables you to train a language model that can interpret natural language commands. Now the language model consists of 3 components. First of all, I might start with something called an utterance, which is a phrase that a user might say or type. So for example, switch the light on. Now, entities are specific items that are referenced in an utterance. So for example, our language model here might be for home automation, and it might recognize household devices such as light or fan or something like that. And in this case, the entity in the utterance is a light. And from that, what we're trying to do is detect the intent. So the intent identifies the desired action for an utterance. And in this case, the intent is we want to switch something on, and the something we want to switch on is the entity that's mentioned in the utterance, which in this case is the light. Well, let's take a look at how that might work in action by looking at another online demo. So here's an online demo of the LUIS service, and you can see that I have this image over here of a house with various lights. And I can make statements about those lights. So I could select one of these existing ones. So I could say I'm watching a movie, and the LUIS service then automatically dims the lights in the living room for me to do that. Or I could just simply make a statement here. So I could type switch the kitchen lights on, apply that. and the kitchen area lights up and I can see some more lights appearing there. So I have this ability to type in or to speak an utterance, and from that utterance the Lewis service is going to try and identify my intent. What is it that I want it to do? And within the utterance it might identify specific entities that will enable it to figure out specifically what are the, in this case, lights that I want it to switch on, or the rooms that I want to illuminate. Well, now it's your turn to have a go with Lewis. We have a lab that you can use that is based on a Microsoft Learn module, and that will give you the chance to build your own language model using Lewis and to run some code against that to discern the intent of the instructions, the utterances that you submit to it. The lab, once again, is based on a module in Microsoft Learn, and it's this one here, create a language model with Lewis. So we can skip the introduction and the get started with Lewis and switch straight to the exercise. And actually all that you're going to do is bring up the code space that you used in the previous lab. So we'll go ahead and go back to our code spaces environment. It's been a while since I used this one, so it's suspended itself in the meantime. But if I just click that and connect, it'll load and resume the code space ready for me to use. And when the code space is loaded, it may have reverted to the kind of dark background. Again, I can just refresh the page. And if you get some of these messages popping up, you can just go ahead and ignore these. So I'll close my welcome pages. And what I'm interested in doing now is the language understanding lab. So we'll open that one up. And let's take a look at this lab. So the first thing we're going to do, there's some text here that we can read, but the first thing we need to do is to create an authoring and prediction resource for using Lewis, or language understanding. And we do that in the Azure portal. So we'll open up a connection to the Azure portal. And once we're in there, we'll create a resource, and I'll just search for language understanding. And this is the service that I need, so we'll click create. And similarly to what we did with the custom vision service in the previous lab, we've got this option to create for both, or just for authoring, or just for prediction. So in this case, we're going to go with both. We'll create it in our subscription that we've got here. And we already created a resource group for cognitive services previously, so we can go ahead and choose that one, or I could just create a new one if I wanted to. But I need to have a name for this language understanding service. So I'm just going to, again, give it some sort of unique name. I'll call it Graham-Lewis. And I get a little tick that tells me that's a valid name that I can use. So we need to choose a location and a pricing tier for our authoring resource. So I will choose, out of the recommended ones, I'll choose the West US. And the authoring pricing tier, I will go with the F0 option so that I've got that free tier available to me. And for the prediction resource, it's already selected East US for me, which is fine. I could move it into the same as my authoring. I'll move it to West US 2, so it's a bit neater. And I can choose the prediction tier pricing, and again, I'll go with F0 for that. So I've got my authoring and my prediction resource. We can review and go ahead and create those. And when the resource is created, I again have the option to go to the resource, which would be the authoring resource, but there's also a prediction resource. So if I go to my authoring resource to start with, and just have a look at the overview, I can see this is in my cognitive services resource group. And if I go and have a look at that, and just take a look at what's in there, I've actually got two Lewis resources. I've got Graham Lewis, which I'm going to use for prediction, and I've got Graham Lewis authoring, which is my authoring resource. So now that I've got those resources, I'm ready to work with them to go and author a language understanding model. And to do that, I'm going to use the Lewis portal, and there's a link to that here. So I'll just go and open that up. And I'll just sign in using the same credentials. And the first time I sign in, I need to let it access my info in my profile, so we'll just say yes. And now we're ready to go and create some Lewis applications. So I get this welcome message with some options. I'm going to agree to the service conditions. And I'm going to use an Azure resource. I'm going to use the Azure resource that I just created. So let's go and create and use our existing Azure resource. And that Azure resource is in my subscription. And the resource name is the Graham Lewis authoring resource, because I'm going to initially author my model. So I can select all of that. And then I'm ready to go. Now, if you've previously signed into Azure, you won't get the welcome page, but you'll be able to go to My Apps and you'll be able to see your option to choose a subscription and an authoring resource and start from there. So either way, you can get to this point where you're ready to go and create an application in the My Apps page here. So we're going to create a new app for conversation. So let's go and create that. And it needs to have an app name. And we are going to call ours Home Automation. We'll leave it in English. The app description is going to be voice controlled home automation or something like that. And the prediction resource that we're going to use when we publish this language model for people to use is going to be our Graham Lewis one. So we're authoring on the Graham Lewis authoring and we're publishing for prediction on Graham Lewis. So we'll go ahead and click done there. I get a little wizard appearing, which I don't need, so I'm just going to close that down. And I'm ready to go ahead and start working on my application here. So it actually starts us on the intents page, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an entity. Now, entities are the things that we can operate on, the different items that we might want to do something with. So I am going to create a new entity, and it's going to be a list entity in this case, and I'm going to call it device. So we have an entity called device. We're going to use our system to control different devices around the house. And that device, because it's a list entity, is going to have some list items. So we need a list item here. So our list item is going to be light. That's the name of the device we're going to create. And we'll give that a synonym of lamp. So sometimes you might say lamp, sometimes you might say light. And then we'll put in another list item because I might want to operate something like a fan. And again, that might have a synonym. So I might sometimes call that the AC for air conditioning. So I've created a couple of entities, a couple of items that I might want to work with. And now I'm ready to go and create some intents that work with these particular items. So to do that, we'll go to intents and we'll create an intent. Now, one of the things I might want to do with these things is switch them on. So we'll create an intent called switch on. And if I go and have a look at that, the sort of thing that somebody might say when they want to switch on a device, we'll just close that. Sort of thing someone might say would be something like switch on the light. And I can see that it's already identified that light is an entity, and it's in this case it's a device. If I click on that, I can go and have a look at that, and yes, that would be our light that we'd be switching on. And I could say something else that somebody might say. They might say something like switch on the fan. And again, fan is an entity, and in this case it's our fan. So I've got a couple of things that people might say for switching on, for my switch on intent. And what we'll do now is we will go and add another intent. So we've got our switch on, we'll add a switch off. And for our switch off, again, similarly, we'll have some utterances that people might say. So I might say switch off the light. And again, light is our entity here. And I might say switch off the fan. And again, it picks up that fan is an entity, and again, this time it's going to be our fan. So we've created a couple of expressions that people might say, these utterances. They indicate the intent, switch on or switch off. There's also a none intent, just in case somebody types in something that's neither one of these, that's not understood. And these relate to the entities that we created. So we've got the beginnings of a language model here. Now, once I've got that in place, I'm going to go and train my language model. So we'll just go ahead and click train. And that finishes training fairly quickly. We've got some predictions loaded, and I could actually go and test that. If I go and test, I could say something like switch the fan on. And it comes back and it says, yeah, that's the switch on intent that you've triggered there. And I could even try something that we didn't, enter. I could say turn off the light. And that's the switch off intent. Again, it's identified that, even although I didn't use exactly the same phrasing. So it's using some semantic understanding of the language to figure out what's the intent that I have, and also what are the entities that are associated with that intent. So I've got my language model there. What I could do now is I could go and publish that so that I could use it from a client application. So we'll go ahead and click publish. And I'm actually going to publish it straight to production. So we'll take a production slot. And off it goes to publish that. And when that's published, I can go to the Manage tab here. And I can see there's an app ID that I've got for my application. And also I can look at the Azure resources where it's published. So it's published on my Graham Lewis endpoint here. And I can see the primary key and the endpoint URL for those are there as well. So if I go to my settings here, I'm just going to grab that app ID, because back in my lab, I've got some code actually, just a little further down here, where I am going to actually go and use this from a client application. So we'll put in our app ID, and we'll go and get the key and the endpoint for our prediction resource as well. So those was in Azure resources. I'm looking at prediction resource, and I want the key, either the primary or the secondary would work. So we'll just grab that primary key, and we'll get the endpoint as well. So I've added that code. We don't really need to worry too much about the details of the code, but basically what it's going to do is prompt me to enter in some sort of command, and then it's going to use the key and the endpoint and the app ID to connect to my Lewis service, and then return the intent and any entities that are identified in that, and display in some sort of appropriate image underneath here. So we'll try that. Let's just go and run this cell. And at the top of the screen, I get a prompt to enter a command. So I will say turn on the light. And I get back a response. It identifies turn on the light. The predicted intent is switch on, and the predicted entity is the light. So I get a picture of the light being switched on. And again, I could go and run that cell again. And this time I could enter switch the fan on. And again, it identifies the intent is switch on, the entity is the fan, and I get a picture of the fan spinning around. So it's taking in the text that I enter, and it's returning an appropriate intent, and the entities are identified within that intent, and it's able to figure out what it is that I'm trying to do when I tell it to switch the fan on. Now, of course, I'm typing that in. In reality, in a home system, we'd probably want to use voice control. And to do that, I'm going to need to use another cognitive service. So I'm going to go back to the portal here. And I'm going to add another service into here. And I'm just going to add a generic cognitive services resource. And we'll give it a name. I'll call it Graham Cog. We'll put it in the East US. We use the S0 pricing tier. and we'll put it in that cognitive services resource group that we've been using. So confirm that I read everything and click create. And that goes and deploys that resource. And again, I could just go to that resource, and it has its own keys and endpoint, just as I would expect for any cognitive services resource. So if I go back to my code now, I'm going to need that key and that endpoint to use this cognitive service resource. So we'll go off and grab those. So here's the key. And we'll get the endpoint as well. And if I run that cell, I'm now ready to use that cognitive services resource. So I've got one prediction resource for my Lewis service, and now I've got a separate cognitive services resource that I'm going to use to take what I say audibly, take the voice, and convert that into text that I can then send to Lewis. So to do that, I'm not actually going to speak. I've got an audio file all queued up, ready to go with the command. So I could go ahead and run this and get the response. So let's run that cell.
Turn the light on.
And I get my audio file playing, turn the light on, and that is then converted to text. So that's my cognitive services. I'm using the speech service in that instance to actually convert the speech from the audio file into text. And then I'm submitting that text to my language understanding model, and it's predicting what the intent was, and it's turning on the light. So in this module, we took a look at natural language processing, and we talked a little bit about what natural language processing is and the sorts of tasks that area of AI covers. And then we looked specifically at the NLP-related services that are available in Azure. And specifically, we looked at cognitive services for text analytics, for speech recognition and synthesis, for translation, and for building language models using the language understanding service. Now you can learn a little more and dive a little deeper into some of these services by exploring them in the Microsoft Learn learning path that we have here. And here is that learning path, and you can see that it contains a number of modules. One that will let you build some code and work against the text analytics service, one for working with the speech service, one for translating both text and speech, and then the one that you already used to do the lab in this module.